Construction or the Joint Conference Committee. So welcome, Mr. Co-Chair of Appropriations. Do you have any discussion or amendments that you'd like to offer with respect to the Joint Conference Committee?
Wait a minute. Do you have a copy of my amendment?
Of your proposed Joint Conference report? I believe I think I do. I think you sent me a copy of that earlier, and I think I printed that.
I want to make
out.
sure it's the right one. John? Is that the right one?
Mr. Chairman, Karen will be passing a copy
Okay.
out.
Okay, let's do that. Why don't we go ahead and do that?
Bob, can you pull your mic a little closer?
And Don, do you have this
There we
amendment
go.
in front of you? So I think I'll let you walk through it. It's faster.
So I think I have. Well, we'll just work off that one. I had the one you sent me, but we'll just work off the one I just
Yeah,
presented.
it's
So
a
we're
little- They're the
sure
same.
we're on the right one. So go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Co-Chair, I'll have Mr. Don Richards kind of just walk us through it that way.
Sure. We're always happy to have Mr. Richards walk us through anything. So go ahead, Mr. Richards.
Mr. Chairman, as our LSO practice, we go back to the engrossed version, and we have deleted the three Senate amendments. The first Senate Committee of the Whole amendment, the first Senate Standing Committee amendment basically changed the bill back to its original version. Then the Committee of the Whole amendment removed the appropriations for the higher education entities into private funds. And then Senate Third Reading Amendment number 1 further changed the higher education facilities to be an authorization and allow for application to the federal ARP funds. This goes back to the original engrossed bill. And I'll start with just a quick overview, then we can walk through it line by
Well,
line.
and Dawn, if I could, I think that while it did go back and delete those amendments, ultimately it's almost in many respects, almost a further delete and further amend in a lot of respects. So,
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly correct.
Okay, so let's go ahead.
So the overview of this, jumping ahead a little bit, is it replaces funding, state funding, $6 million of general fund for colleges, $6 million of general funds for the University of Wyoming, College of Law, or other facilities. It restores $2 million as well as the committee for the state capitol. And this includes the same priorities as the engrossed version. And it restored $210,000 for the Wyoming Territorial Prison. I can walk through where you can find each of those if you'd like, but those are the main 4 additions.
Right. And so, I mean, if we go back, so going back to the original bill puts us back in the table. And so if we went to on the table, if we went to community college or SCD at line 18, essentially, if we go there now, we would have we would put $6 million in we'd put $6 million in general fund in that column. And then we make the conforming amendments in the footnotes. And then when we come back to and then when we get to page 8 with where we have the College of UW, again, same type of thing there. We're adding, essentially putting in $6 million of general fund and deleting the references to S13 as the SIPA, right? And then we make the conforming amendments in the footnotes. And so anyway, so keep going.
Mr. Chairman, that is exactly correct. On page 8, line 7, you're making that restoration. The bottom of page 8 is all conforming language for the footnotes related to UW. Then we have a series of 5 amendments on page 19. That is a revision to $2 million related to the state capital. And this also comes from the general fund as opposed to SIPA. And then the significant change here is section 9 is an entirely new section. It builds upon identical language which was adopted in Senate third reading amendment number 1, which specifies the 4 projects of the higher education at community colleges, as well as the University of Wyoming, and indicates that the chief executive, that is the governor, with the assistance of the state construction department, shall submit grant applications to secure ARP funds as may be available for all of those projects. At this time, the guidance has not been prepared. We don't know whether or not the state will need to apply once for all projects, kind of an umbrella application, or whether or not it will be a individual application for each potential project. To the extent that federal funds are received, the total dollar amount in private funds, meaning donations or local property taxes, shall be reduced in a dollar for dollar match from the federal funds that are accessed.
So with regards to that language, Don, let's take University of Wyoming. And if they use this for the law school, just on the law school, they've already raised, I think, and would have commitments of around $5.5 or $6 million of real private funds. And I think UW has committed roughly $4 million to it, so they're going to have around $8 or $9 million available. And so then with the 1-for-1 language and using the ARP question dollars, the question is, how does the ARP language and the 1-for-1 affect the $6 million and then the other roughly $8 million that would be available through the private funds they've been raising from various law practices and folks like that, and the UW money that contributes to it? Would that be something that goes as part of the application process on exactly how much they're asking for? Can you expand or diminish the application that goes for the ARP dollars? How does that correlate with the language in the bill?
Go ahead,
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, the first and foremost, the state funds, the 6 million general funds for both colleges and the university are not impacted by the reduction. That would be available for other projects. If let's say 3 of them get denied, 1 of them gets approved, then the $6 million for community colleges could be used on one of the facilities that was not approved for federal funding. With respect to the private donations or the institutional resources, either at community colleges or at UW, if they receive a positive response on a grant application of $12 million, then for the College of Law, then that $12 million of institutional funds and private funds would no longer be available for this purpose. They could spend it on another purpose, but not for the College of Law. And the same thing would apply to the Student Center in Powell, for example. If they received, I think it's a $23 million project at NWC Student Center. If they receive the full $23 million from the federal government, their institutional resources, whether that is foundation money or a bond or cash reserves, would not be eligible for that project. They could save it and use it for another project, but they wouldn't be eligible to use it.
So and that's kind of the nature of my question. If we want the community colleges to do 1-to-1 matches, so whether that's ARP dollars or their own dollars, that would be a process of how you draft your application for the ARP dollars. So, for example, with the law school, if we say there's already 6 + 8, 14, so then essentially you only ask for another 10. to get to 24. And then it would not supplant it. Is that your understanding?
Mr. Chairman, yes, and if that is the desire of the committee, we would say shall submit applications not to exceed 1/2 of the authorized amount or something like that, so that a $23 million project, the maximum application would be, 11.5 million.
And committee, the reason I bring this up is part of the purpose of, what we're trying to do is have the UW and community colleges have some skin in the game. So it's just not all free dollars. It also by doing that, there's 109 million in the ARP Act specifically for capital construction. So we want to stretch that theoretically. We may want to stretch it as far as we can take it, and to get priority both from the governor's office and from I think even on the trend of the application process. If we're demonstrating that we're using matching dollars to match these dollars. So we're stretching the ARP dollars and we're stretching our construction dollars so we can get more construction done and have more available to apply for out of that 109 million for other statewide projects. Say it's a hospital in Riverton or in Sublette County or whatever it is, it just frees up more dollars. And so I want to make sure we all know as we finalize this amendment, how we want to address that. And we understand the ramifications of the 1-to-1 versus that. So does
Mr.
everyone
Co-Chair.
understand what?
Well, Mr. Co-Chair, I want to make sure I understand if I could ask a question.
Go ahead.
So Don, let me give you just a couple of hypotheticals. Let's take the Sheridan College project, which is, I think, a $9 million project. So it'd be 4.5 million raised locally, 4.5 million, they're going to go in and look for ARP funds or look to this fund. And let's say that at the last minute, they decide they're going to enhance it and it turns into an $11 million project. They have to raise $2 million more locally because their app goes into ARP just for 4.5 million. Do they get a reduction in state funding or an offset in ARP funding if they raise more than 50%?
Mr. Chairman, that hypothetical would cause a challenge, if you would. And the reason being is you are authorizing a maximum project cost. And if you want to increase those project costs at the bottom of page 2 and add 25% to one or more of them, or round up $2 million or whatever you wish, I think that should be incorporated in those maximum amounts.
So Don, just to follow up on that, I think we have a mechanism that up to $1 million, you don't have to have further authorization. So 1 million you could do because that's in the statutes. But the other issue is on this, whether it's 1-to-1 match or 1/2 to 1. We could say up to 1.5 to 1 and up to 1. That way you don't have to be right on, which would also facilitate that, I think.
Well, and I guess just to bring it back down to an example, maybe a living example. So when they, up at Casper College, when they built the EWCC Center at Casper College, it was originally was same type of deal, $1 general fund, $1 local match. But my understanding from what happened up there ultimately is that they required the use of the dedicated amounts of local funds first, and then ultimately when it actually didn't quite, I think it came in under budget a little bit, the reduction was solely in general fund. So ultimately it was more than a one, ended up being slightly more than a 1-to-1 match because of the way it was administered. Now, I don't know if that's how this applies across the board, but I think it also but if that's the mechanism by which CMD kind of oversees these projects, doesn't that kind of resolve? Does that resolve the issue to some degree?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Chairman Perkins, that's a great example, but we changed the language a short time after that Casper College project. It used to say that the private dollars were spent first and then the state dollars were spent second, so that the state would be the one receiving any savings if there was a cost savings. And I actually made a motion last year to do that, and it was soundly defeated. So that is no longer the way we do it, because it was always done in each CapCon bill. That language was added. And about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that language was removed. And to this point, I've been unsuccessful in getting it put back in to make sure the state would see savings.
Well,
Mr. Co-Chair, I'd have to back, Mr. Co-Chair, I'd have to go back to the college. There was a reason why that was not workable. I cannot recall what it is. And it's not just that they wanted to suck up more money, which is always a good thing anyway, but there was something about just the timelining of the projects that made that not workable. And I'll go back and find out what that information is and get it to the committee. But if I could follow up with just one more example, perhaps more realistic and more problematic, and it's not an enhancement to the project, but we're building a health sciences center, and it was projected, I think, 10 million. And we've got, and the bids all came in 1 3/4 million over, just because the market is so hot up there. And so I don't know whether we want to just and I don't mind if we want to say that if you're going to go over X%, you've got to raise that locally. I just got to be able to raise it locally. That's the only thing that I'm getting after. And then one other just sort of variation on the theme. We don't yet know on this ARP, when they say capital construction, critical capital construction, I know what we think of it as in our rules, but I don't know that the federal government's going to exclude in the final analysis things like the equipment, the furniture, the fixtures, that sort of thing. That may be, in which case that's over and above the $9 million cost, or the weightlifting machines that you're at the Bob Nicholas Athletics Center.
So the,
NREC.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to address Senator Kinski's concern, and I think what the college is referring to is these project dollars were put in place 18 months ago. And since we didn't have a capital construction budget last year, the general cost of inflation of construction is 3 to 5% a year. And so I think that's where these projects have some concern, is that the numbers are outdated. And so I'm guessing that's what they're coming to you, Senator Kinski. And so then to the point that was made earlier, is this is a maximum project price. And so while Chairman Nicholas said that a project up to $1 million doesn't need state approval, I think all of these would be approved as over $1 million. And so then if we have only approved $9 million for the student center, or whatever we were discussing earlier, that project cannot exceed that value no matter who raises it, whether it's state dollars, private dollars, federal dollars, unless they come back and ask for an exemption to exceed it, because it's not, that's the $1 million threshold is not in play for an exemption to go over a capital construction project. So if we want to correct it, we should just go into these dollar values currently and add 2 or 3 or 4% or add something like that to make up for the fact that there are old numbers that are being used. And that would then address your concern, Senator Kinski.
So go ahead, Lloyd, excuse me, Representative Larson.
Lloyd?
Wait a minute.
Yeah, so, and in tagging on to that, to your point, Senator Kinski, is that's been a typical inflation. Building materials have just been horrendous this year. And I think that we really should consider taking that into consideration, that those numbers that we have that are 18 months old versus what building materials are and impact to construction costs are really, I think we want to make sure that we're taking that into consideration.
So instead of
So I
saying
think that makes sense to me. Does it make sense to you?
Well, the simplest solution that I heard from Don is just bump up the maximum amount on the projects by a percentage.
like 5%.
Well, so I mean, you do that. I mean, so you either do that one, you can authorize them to go up to a certain percentage higher than that instead of come with a specific dollar amount. But coming back to that, ultimately, if we do that, then effectively So let's say, what's the most expensive project in the community college list? So if we say the most expensive one is the student center up at Northwest Community College, that's the most expensive. So if we add, so that's, let's say it's, we add, so 20% of 5 million is, 20% of 5 million is, excuse me, 20 million is $4 million, all right? And so we're saying, okay, so ultimately, if they had 5%, they could actually go up to roughly 20, there's almost 23, so they go up to almost 27 million in construction dollars, right?
If you said 20%.
Well, if we said, well, excuse me, 5%, I'm sorry, 5% of $20 million is, okay, thank you. So it's what 10 is $1 million, but anyway, they go up to 24 million in our example. So what happens when they go up to 24? So what happens with respect to the general fund dollars? Does the general fund dollar expenditures go up one half? Their general fund automatically cover up one half of that increase over this authorized amount, or how does that work?
Mr. Chairman, and to Representative Walter's point, this year is different and historical years have been different. The $6 million of general fund is a fixed amount.
Okay.
It is what it is, and it can be distributed to eligible projects.
So in the community college instance, the community college commission will allocate that according to the priority or the criteria that are already in. Okay. So and then because under the bills written, the ERA funds are deemed to be private funds in these things. So basically, if they're successful in matching with ERA funds, that would take care of their match obligation. Or if they get zero general fund dollars, then their ERA funds would go, they can use ERA funds associated with any other form of quote private fund up to the limit of this plus the 5%, right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, then how does, then I'm still concerned about if they need to go out and raise additional private money, does this match ratio penalize them in any way? Let's say they're under the maximum authorized limit. They've got the bids came in high. And so they've got to go out and raise an extra $1 million. They've got to do that locally. How does the 1-for-1 match? You suggested something about permitting up to a higher match rate of some kind.
Well, no, I think that was my question, and the question was answered that you only have X amount of general funds. So I'm talking about community colleges. It depends on what the community college allocates of the money of the general fund money to that project, and ultimately, regardless of whether so ultimately it'll always be at least a 1-to-1 match, but it has potential to be greater than a 1-to-1 match because you have to make up the difference if there's no general fund dollars to cover. That makes sense. Okay. Did I say that right, Don?
Mr. Chairman, there actually is no match required in this. They could get 100% funding from the feds. One of the smaller projects.
The match is only the general fund. There's only a match with respect to general fund.
And even with that, Sheridan actually is the least expensive. If all 6 million went to Sheridan, they would have to come up with the other 3. But they could, the Community College Commission and State Construction Slip Board could give the full 6 million to Sheridan, in which case they would only have.
So Don, how would we amend the language to require that at least half the project cost has to come from institutional funds of some sort, wherever they comes from?
Or at least something other than the state general.
Yeah, so we've turned it, I think we've got the definition. The definition we've got is private funds. So whether it comes from institution, whether it comes from coronavirus relief money, or whether it comes from private donors, it's all going to be private funds.
And that, Mr. Chairman, so let me ask, so just taking what you just said, so all of that counts as private funds. So take, if the community put on a tax to raise money, that would go into that pot. So if they raised, I take CWC Jackson, because we're just talking about their specific example. We've raised $1 million privately. We've raised $5 million in spec tax money. So we have a total, say we have a total of $6 billion. That goes on the private revenue side towards this project of 16 million plus a 5% bump for inflation, which in Jackson will be 10, but that's a different story. But anyway, so that with the gap that's left, the institution could put in money, or we could raise more money privately. And then, or go to ARP to try to balance out that money. So anyway, any one of those revenue streams is very on a one-to-one match if it's low.
So
John, what I heard is we've got this fixed amount of general funds. The ARP funds, in the event that the ARP funds covered the total amount of construction, then you can take those general fund dollars and put them someplace else. And so I think that we want to be careful on requiring a one-to-one match with those general fund dollars, because if the ARP funds would cover it in total, we could shift those general funds elsewhere. Don, did I say that incorrectly?
Excellent points, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize. I think I advised you incorrectly. There is a one-to-one match that is retained on the general funds only.
that's what I thought.
And the matching funds can come from the university or college or any other source. So that would be inclusive of the items that you mentioned.
So Mr.
And
Thank you,
those
Don.
footnotes were retained. Excuse me.
Mr. Chairman. So Mr. Co-Chair Nicholas, I thought it was also, I thought it was the will of the group, maybe not. I thought there had been discussion that we wanted to do the same thing with the ARP funds, because we wanted that 104 to potentially be 208 by saying, you've got to go one-to-one on the ARP or the GF. And you can't, and I think our intention was you can't double dip. If you got 2 million in general fund, you don't get to go get another 2 million in ARP. You might get your next 4 if you need it from the ARP. Did we intend to have a one-to-one match on ARP or no?
I think what the amendment that we put on was my amendment in the Senate. And then ultimately, for the most part, it was adopted into the delete and amend here, was that ARP money is considered private funds. And so the only match requirement is for general fund dollars.
Okay.
As long as you've matched the general fund dollars from any other source, which would include ARP, you've done the match.
And Mr. Co-Chair,
But,
go ahead.
so, but
Well,
but
that's-
then we need to talk about this one paragraph on the dollar.
Right, and that's why I brought it up, because my question is, do we want to require one-to-one matches on the other ARP dollars from institutional sources or some other definition, or any source basically, but require that so that we get a bigger bang for our buck. And I believe it just makes sense that if, this application has to come from the governor basically, or maybe capital construction. But, and we're telling them essentially to prioritize it. That doesn't mean necessarily that they will, number one. And number two, if in order to justify why we're paying for this and not other capital construction projects, if we are requiring a one-to-one match, I think it'll get stronger consideration and stronger support from everybody. So that's why I bring it I want to have a discussion. I mean, I'm willing to send it out either way. I think requiring a match is more powerful and we get more bang for the buck for the state.
I don't disagree. I think that's a correct statement, but you come back. So let's go back to Eastern, which we go back on our funding for if Eastern. I mean, Eastern doesn't have a project on here, but if Eastern wants to go do that, in history, Eastern's match was usually a 1 to 10. Or
Yeah,
something.
we've
Or
always
1
made a
to 5.
combination for Eastern because when a project comes up on Eastern, we usually do a 5 to 1 or some other component. They tell us how much they can raise realistically.
And so if you take that and you start to work a match for the ARP funding, I mean, you need, instead of having just a 1-to-1 match, you need to have some kind of sliding scale. And if so, what direction do you give, or do you just tell CMD or somebody in the governor's office to develop some kind of rule for that? I mean, how do we do that? Or is it just too big of a problem?
Well, we could just make a recommendation that on the applications on the, that the governor,
Favor or?
well, that he attempts to get matching dollars for the art dollars.
And we don't give him a specific match,
Yeah.
but just require some match based, and they can establish the criteria on which they rate those. I don't have a problem.
I like that.
Huh?
I like that. I really like the idea of local skin in the game. I dislike the idea of just how crowded it can get at the trough when nobody has to bring any skin in the game. I mean, what's the penalty for not putting an application in? And I think people need to be serious enough that their communities are coming together, that they're going to raise some money. And if they can't raise 1-to-1, then let's give the governor the flexibility to specify how much.
And we'll get two more community college projects potentially, or 3, so.
So is that a motion?
That's a conceptual motion.
Do you understand the concept, Mr. Richards?
Mr. Chairman, I do. I think that would apply on page 3, paragraph D, and potentially its own paragraph. And we can include a executive branch requirement of non-state general funds matching requirement.
Yeah, so that'll change I think, will that change that? That will change, I think. Am I thinking about this right? Will that change the $1 reduction for each dollar of federal funds? Or it doesn't necessarily change that. I think that leaves that alone, but we just have to some additional language in there. So that language will go at the bottom of page 3 and spill over onto page 4, and maybe even onto page 5.
Okay, everyone understand the amendment and the page?
I don't know. Yeah, we'll see we'll see how the economy of words go, I guess.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
would that also affect language on page 6, starting on line 23, as well as page 8, starting on line 15, because that's where in the bill we discussed the 1-to-1 match language. And I guess I'm still a little blurry on what the proposed amendment here is.
I think that match language is general fund match language, and that's different. That's a little bit different. Because we're putting a very limited amount of general fund out there. And so we're keeping that match requirement. But when we're talking about a different match requirement, if you have somebody who has 0 general fund dollars and they're coming and they're trying to build under using ARP funds, they still have to have some kind of match. So they have local skin in the game. They've got to have some kind of match. We're not going to tell them how much of a match they have to have, but we're going to let the governor and the construction management people kind of do that. So it'll be a little socialistic, from each according to their each according to their path, to each according to their need, or however that works.
So follow up, Mr. Chairman. So Mr. Chairman, follow up and just using a theoretical example, if there's $6 million of general funds for the community colleges and there's 4 projects and they divide it evenly, $1.5 million per project of general funds. So then the locals would have to come up with $1.5 million to match that $1.5 million of general fund that was put in to meet the 1-to-1 match. So that would get the project to $3 million, and say it's let's pick the first one there that's $12 million, whatever that one is, or excuse me, the outreach center, 17 million. So they have $3 million towards the 17 million, so they could request 13, I guess it would be, in ARP funds. And that would be acceptable in all of this language. Is that accurate?
Wouldn't that be within the confines of the bill as it's written?
Mr. Chairman, I understood you wanted a match required on the ARP funds.
Right.
Well, but as a technical reading of this bill, I think that's an accurate statement. Then you get to the next level, is that a sufficient match that we would expend, that the governor would approve and advance that application, using that as a sufficient match? That's a different question, and we're not controlling that analysis. We're just saying they have to do some kind of analysis, and they'll have to provide some measurement of whether that's a sufficient match or not. That's the way I think this bill works right now. And Don, you're nodding your head.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree that it's possible that the governor doesn't require any match. If you do want to specify, is the local resources that is in Representative Walter's example of 1.5 million local funds, can that be matched once for general funds and once for art funds, or is it an additional match?
I would, well, as the bill stands now, I don't think it requires it. If you want to add some language, but my suggestion or my thought is that we wouldn't do that. Maybe what we would do is maybe in this conception that we have is that we just asked the governor's office or the CMB to take into consideration local resources. Just some general language like that, and then we turn the bird loose and we turn the bird loose and see if it comes back. See how it comes back. That's what I mean. But you know, we're talking about this amendment. To me, that seems acceptable. But maybe y'all have some different ideas.
Well, Mr. Chairman, folks back home would probably shoot me, but I'd like to see a little bit more rigor in it. Otherwise, you really do run the danger that people say, well, you know, I'm just going to go in for 100% ARP. And the line gets.
We can't possibly raise any more.
Yeah, there's just no way we could raise any more.
Well, I mean,
and so a separate match requirement on the ARP dollars, but keeping it general enough that the governor can consider the local resources and their ability to actually raise any more.
we could just have Sliv approve these grants. They do that all the time.
We're softer.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'd ask Senator Kinski, is it a bad thing that we spend all the ARP funds and save those private resources for the next project down the line? So when you're going out asking the general public for their money, there's always going to be another project. And so we could save that for the time being and use that money in 2 or 3 years and capitalize on the federal dollars today, because we have a shortened window of expenditure on those federal dollars versus trying to get more skin in the game from them. And I asked that rhetorically.
Well, it's not a bad thing. It's just a way to try and get people to sharpen up, to really think about whether or not they're going to throw an application in the hopper or not.
Well, and Mr. Coach, the problem with that is if you applied that logic to all of these funds, then we're going to spend $80 million of the $109 on community colleges and UW. And I don't think we want to do that. I think we'll get definite kickback from the governor.
No, not kickback. We're not getting any kickback.
Yeah. Kicking.
Yeah, we might get. Yeah, it was pushback. We're not getting any kickback.
And so I just think that, and it's always been our practice on community colleges.
50% unless you're too poor to raise it.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
Mr. Chairman, so then my understanding of the scenario now is that there's a 1-to-1 match on the state funds. And then there's an additional requirement of match on the ARP funds to be determined by state.
that's correct.
That's correct.
So that was the motion.
That was the motion. So we're still on the motion, and we've been talking about potential amendments to the motion.
Just want to make sure I'm tracking.
With Mr. Chairman, with the further caveat that after that, anything they raise, it's just anything they raise. It's just if it's not ARP money and it's not general fund money, they can raise whatever they raise up to the maximum project amount that's authorized.
And then we've got that in the bill. Any of these projects are authorized to go do that, and they don't have to wait for general fund. They don't have to wait for ARP. They can secure funds privately. They can charge ahead.
So are we ready to vote on the amendment? Question?
I do have one follow-up question. So, Mr. Chairman, we talked about having a buffer in there of
That's a separate amendment.
separate amendment. Okay.
Yeah. So we're everybody clear on the question? Okay, this is, well, why don't we do this? Actually, I'm not going to do this to Don. I was going to have Don repeat it, but I think Don's going to go back and listen to the recording, and then he's going to. That's why they have it.
I think Don can repeat it.
We'll see. Don's an awfully bright guy. We'll put him on the spot. Don, you want to repeat what you have down, what you understand our motion to be?
Mr. Chairman, on page 3, after subsection D, insert
B or D?
D.
I'm using a different. Oh, on the
On
amendment.
the amendment.
Yeah, right, on the amendment.
Well, on the proposed conference committee report.
Okay.
Uh, The governor may require non-state matching requirements for all applications, taking into consideration local resource availability or something to that effect.
Well, I think we said he shall require, but take consider, not may. But then if he requires it and they can't do it, then he can do it. But if we say may, he could not consider it at all.
Yep. So Senator Drew, have you got that? Okay, we're ready. Everybody understand the question? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Motion carries.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Co-Chair.
So on that not to exceed amount, I would suggest that we add a 5% cushion.
To the limit price, yeah, just 5%.
Mr. Co-Chair, I appreciate that. Our most recent experience in Sheridan indicates, and as Representative Larson points out, the construction materials are through the roof, especially lumber. And our most recent experience is it's better than 10. I'd like to go a bit more than, I'd like to see us go to 10 rather than 5, just to give us ourselves a little bit of extra room.
That's fine. Friendly amendment.
Mr. Chairman, does that include this law school, the university project as well?
Yeah, any capital project.
So let me ask a clarifying question on that. I mean, it's good. Do you want to limit never mind. I'll stop that. So, all right, do you understand the motion?
Don?
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, I understand it applies to all projects in section 9, which inclusive of the university, but not all capital construction projects in the bill.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Colleges and UW.
Yeah.
So, well,
Are there any other
that
ones?
begs the question.
Uh,
That begs the question, if we go back to our chart.
the state parks?
I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a number, you've got in this bill, we've got McGee, we've
Mechanical.
got state parks, we've got,
HVAC.
it's so, I mean, if we think construction materials are up for these guys, aren't they gonna be up for everybody?
So on McGee, that's funds that are already in place that they're required to use. We're not going to appropriate any new funds. And your point's correct, but I think it's a different scenario than this. And state parks is yet different. There, I guess if you wanted to allow them to use more of their own money, you could. But I think new requests would be based on what that is. I think we're having this discussion because we're using 18-month-old predictions in light of current material costs. Is why we're adding it to these.
Correct. So, I mean, the ones that you think about in here, so I mean, obviously the SPC Flex Fund, no. But we have the maintenance shop in Sheridan, which is 100% federal funds. Do we change that? I don't know. I haven't heard from the military department. State parks, probably so. We got several there for the state parks.
I'm
Mind you,
fine.
that some of those, they've got, all the way down to the women's facility HVAC replacement and then
Yeah, the mechanical and the HVAC.
yeah, things like that.
On the other hand, each one of those can go over $1 million on the project.
So, I mean, so there you go. So maybe we're okay. Maybe we're okay with just the motion as it is. Okay. Got it? You ready? Got it, Mr. Senator Kinski?
Yep.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carries.
Mr.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Don has a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, 2 points of clarification, just so you know, if you ultimately approve this conference committee report, you're spending $26 million of general fund. that is currently not on the profile. So when you leave here, perfectly fine, but rather than 113 million, you'll be around 86 million or so in the general fund.
That assumes all those rest of those bills pass.
It does. It does. I just wanted folks to be aware.
And the budget balancer we have is for
It's 5 million.
5 million.
So it would address
So
5 of this
We'll have a little
26.
bit less than 113 in the statutory reserve account.
Just a point of information.
Well, and then how much more in excess in general fund dollars do we anticipate having at the end of the budget cycle compared to, I mean, are you taking all that into consideration?
No, Mr. Chairman, and we haven't put out a new Craig, but we did run an analysis at the first part of March, and we were running $50 million ahead. If prices stay where they're at, you could easily hit $100 million by June 30th. So this is, you have a significant cushion, and the trend is up, not down. So I'm not dissuading this position. It's a point of information only. My second point is, when you get onto the floor with your last motion there of increase of 10%, you may have a inquiry from your colleagues as to whether or not that was within the two positions, because you're now higher than both of the houses, just to be aware.
Okay, thank you.
So is there a different way to do it, Don? Could we just change the not to exceed number?
Mr. Chairman, if I were defending it, I would argue that this is an authorization of private funds and not an appropriation, and therefore it is not subject to that. I'm trying to give you an
Yeah,
argument.
that's what I needed to hear. Okay, so, Mr. Co-Chair, I would make a motion to increase the capital construction dollars for community colleges. That's line 18, page 5. To 12 million.
So actually,
Is that already in? I think
no,
it
it's
said
not
so.
in. Senator Kinski, do you want to make that motion?
Well, no, I need to see the page. I'm content to have it. Go ahead.
So anyway, so what we do is different than this is on line 18. We're back in the chart now in the original bill. Line 18, as opposed to this, would increase the amount to the community college projects from 6 million to 12 million. That's the motion. I'm getting a nod from
That's the motion.
the largest of the,
That's right.
and he's bigger than I am, so I would take that. But anyway, that's as I understand the motion. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right, members. You
One more
understand the
time
motion?
over 6.
So
On
the
page,
community college increases from 6 to 12
For general fund.
for general fund money. So the community college commission then allocates according to their priorities and their list and readiness and all the things that we talked about. We were in the original bill. Okay, you ready? You ready?
Yep.
All right, you understand the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carries.
So I have a question, Mr. Co-Chair. On your amendment, page 3. It starts on page 2, actually. It says the University of Wyoming is appropriated to utilize up to $25 million in private revenue for design and construction of the University of Wyoming College of Law project or other University of Wyoming projects. And so it doesn't create a priority or a presumption, it just lists it. And so I'm just wondering if,
Well, and I do have a motion for that.
okay, that's what I'm doing.
Thank you. I do have a motion for that. What we would do is on the proposed joint conference committee report is, I think it could be as easy as, Don, if we go to the top of page 3, after revenue for the design and construction and I think you would we would strike the balance of that first line and through other on the second line. And then we would insert of of University of Wyoming projects determined by the Board of Trustees in accordance with their priorities or something like that.
Just by the trustees? is it?
Yeah, just could be just by, as determined by the Board of Trustees. So the projects, the Board of Trustees just approve those projects. Okay. Any questions about the motion? Do we understand the motion discussion or questions or clarification?
Now, Don, my question is that necessary? Is it, what's the typical language that we use when we just say appropriate?
Mr. Chairman, as noted, this is all other funds, so I think it's entirely appropriate. Yes, it's entirely appropriate. There are some buildings over there, unlike community colleges that are entirely privately funded that don't even receive legislative authority. I do have one question just to clarify. The $6 million that you previously approved of general funds for the university, that is in the table and that is specific to the College of Law. Did you want to modify that
I
as well?
would like to modify as it just says University of
Right.
Wyoming. Please. That's part of the motion.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
So any discussion or questions? Go ahead and give you a second. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion included, what's the line, Sherry? Sherry, what's the line page? Right, that amendment just included striking out law school and saying just University of Wyoming, I believe. Is that correct?
That's
Approved
correct.
projects by the trustee.
That's correct. Yep.
That's okay.
So now we're ready again. We got a false start on that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The motion carries. Any other motions on the proposed joint conference committee? report?
So I believe, I just want to confirm, what's the status of the territorial prison? Is that in or out? It's in.
It's in under the, it's in under the, and the territorial prison, that's an authorization from the special revenue account, right? It's not direction from it's not spending out of the, which ultimately, it's an exception to the 60%. Well, so that's, anyway, it's exception to 60%. I don't know where that is in the whole process, but anyway, it's out of the special revenue account,
Okay.
right?
Correct.
Correct.
And it's
We
not
understand
true,
that?
It's not a guarantee that's been done.
Right, they get to do it, they have to balance it. We've got that bill working through the Senate that, I think it was a House bill, worked the Senate or Senate file working through the House. I lost the track, but we were giving at least temporary, if not permanent authorization to use that special revenue fund, so. Okay. So that's in, that's part of what this did. Okay,
As amended. I have a question on the vote.
any other questions or comments? Do we understand the Joint Conference Committee, the proposed Joint Conference Committee report as amended in connection with engrossed HB 121? Are you ready for the question? So all those in favor say aye.
Roll call.
Those opposed, no.
Is this a roll
Okay,
call?
it's good. No, I think we just signed.
We
the
just
paper.
sign off on it. So, and that takes signatures of,
Everybody.
Yes,
All
all
three of
6 of you in this case.
We get a sign in red though, Mr. Co-Chair.
well, one of you has to sign a different color. One different color on each line, isn't it? I think so.
Has to be
I think
determined.
black, blue, and purple would be appropriate.
And so,
Black and blue.
Yeah.
Don, so what we'd like to do is get the report out as quick as we can so that we can do this when the right temperature arises on the concurrences, so.
Which will
Walk us
probably
through what the
tomorrow,
process
hopefully,
is.
but
Mr. Chairman, fortunately, most of it is, I think there were roughly 4 amendments. Most of it's been written, but it will take time. And then we will also create the bill draft shortly after that. So there's not a lot of time between the ideally, not a lot of time between the report adoption on the floor and when it goes to the presiding officers for signature. I don't think this, I could be wrong. I'm looking for some guidance, but I think it can be ready by tomorrow morning, but not today.
So, and just for here, was there anybody who voted, anybody in the joint conference committees that voted no on the conference report? I just want to know.
No.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. The purple is because we're starting to